Okay, thank you. Thank you everybody for coming to our next talk for the Global Daoist Studies series. And we're very happy today to feature Japanese scholarship on Daoism. And so we have Professor Shiga Ichiko and in conversation with Professor Mori Yuria. So I will have the pleasure of introducing both of them. And after that, Professor Shiga will introduce her own work, and Professor Mori will ask her a few questions, and then we'll have an open discussion. So it's my pleasure again today to introduce Professor Shiga. She's a professor at Ibaraki Christian University, where she teaches cultural anthropology and Chinese culture and history. She's one of the leading Japanese scholars on Daoism, especially in regards to the ethnography of spirit writing communities in southern China, especially Hong Kong and Guangdong province. Professor Shiga is the recipient of several research grants that have supported her work on historical ethnography, on pilgrimage and pilgrimage sites, on charitable associations, on local Daoism in southern China, and on spirit writing communities in southern China, which are all topics that emerge in her vast scholarship. I first met Professor Shiga in the context of an international research project aimed at investigating the context of the Daozanjiyao, the most important collection of Daoist scriptures in late imperial China, led first by Professor Monica Esposito and later by Professor Elijah Tim, where she was part of the Japanese team of researchers, and Professor Mori was also part of that team. So I had the pleasure of working with both of them. Professor Shiga is a pioneer in anthropological research on spirit writing communities, especially, as I said, as it pertains to the area of Hong Kong and Guangdong province. She started publishing on these subjects earlier than most other scholars at a time when this topic had been researched in Taiwan to a certain extent, but was not yet seen as a relevant or possible topic of study in mainland China. Further, her ability to perform anthropological research paired with historical and philological work that exactingly connects contemporary practices to their historical roots, masterfully illuminates the history of Daoism in southern China. She is the author and editor of several books and articles on spirit writing history and contemporary practice in southern China. Her specific focus on Hong Kong and Guangdong and her painstaking and detailed research at several sites where spirit writing was and still is practiced today leads her to provide us with a deep understanding of the practice in a different context from the Taiwanese spirit writing halls, which, as I said, had been previously studied. This provides a good foundation for scholars who are venturing towards the study of historical and possibly contemporary practices of spirit writing in other parts of mainland China. Her focus on the local features of each site and community she researches reveals the complexity and at the same time interconnectedness of religious practice in that region. And her work has also brought to the fore the importance of migrant communities in spreading practices and beliefs. In her research, Shiga has focused on the cult of Ludongbing, one of the main divinities descending on spirit writing halls in southern China. This topic has been researched quite widely in the past few years, but Shiga was one of the first scholars to recognize how the communities, these communities were not necessarily directly tied to transient Daoist groups, but were formed by lay believers, wealthy merchants who wanted to promote their social standing by developing this religious identity connected to a powerful divinity. Shiga has also investigated the religious group Xiantian Dao, which adopted spirit writing as one of their main practices in a later period and still uses it today. She has recently expressed interest in working on gender and especially female divinities, and I'm looking forward to this part of her new research. So I welcome Professor Shiga, but before she moves on to present about her own scholarship, I wanted to also introduce Professor Mori so that then the conversation will go without being stopped by my introduction. So Professor Mori, it's my pleasure also to introduce Professor Mori. He's a full professor at Waseda University in Japan. Professor Mori has received a BA, MA, and PhD, all from Waseda University, and is one of the leading Japanese scholars of late imperial Daoism. I've also known Professor Mori for many years, and I still remember his fantastic hospitality during my first trip to Tokyo for a Daoist Studies conference. And so I'm happy, doubly happy to introduce him today. As with Professor Shiga, he also worked on the Daozanjiao project, which again is the most important collection of Daoist scriptures in late imperial China. Professor Mori has worked on the development of Daoism from the late Ming to the Qing, focusing on important but often understudied texts and figures, illuminating both the intellectual world of Qing Daoism and also the structure of the Longmeng tradition, a Daoist tradition that flourished in the late imperial period. His work on Wangchang Yue, for example, and the history of the Daoist precepts is fundamental for our understanding of the history of the founding of the Longmen school and its development in the Qing. His work on Qing dynasty Longmen patriarch Ming Yi De and his work help us also understand the real and imagined lineage of the Longmen school. Recording stopped. Okay. The Wu Jinpen and the Cantun Qi in the publication of Qing Dynasty Neidan, Inner Alchemy author Zhu Yuanwu. So I'm going to leave the floor to Professor Shiga now and later Professor Mori. Thank you.
Thank you for kind introduction. Andあれちょっと待った。あ、酒井さん酒井さん見えてますか？
はい。
あ、すいません。ちょっと待って、今なんか、ちゃんと、あれ、できてません？画面共有。
画面共有できてないですね。
あ、ちょっと待ってください。あ、これでできてます？
大丈夫です。
あ、
で、今、発表者モードになってるんですけど。
発表者モードになっている。
はい。
ちょっと待って。発表者ツール非表示。あれちょっと待って。画面共有が停止しました。なんでかしら。
今ので大丈夫です。はい。
発表者ツールを表示にするとどうですか？
大丈夫です。はい。
あ、今大丈夫ですか？
No problem. はい。
So, first, I'd like to start by expressing my thanks to the members of Global Daoist Studies Forum, Elena, Sakai-san, and Juno-san for giving this wonderful opportunity to present my research today. I would also like to thank Mori-san for joining this meeting as a discussant. I'm very happy that so many people have gathered here today. Many of you are probably active in the field of Chinese religious studies. Since it is not common for Japanese scholars to participate in this forum, some of you may not be familiar with me or my research. So to start with, I'd like to introduce my study and research background briefly before discussing the specifics of my research. This is an outline of my presentation today. My research to date has largely been divided into three parts. The first is on Lizu Totem, Lizu Daoist halls in Hong Kong. I wrote my doctoral dissertation based on this research and published my first book on this topic. And the Chinese translation was subsequently published by the Chinese University of Hong Kong in 2013. The second that pertains to Shantan's Hall of Benevolence in the Chaoshan region, including the belief of the unclaimed dead and Master Sonta form. Since my first visit to the Hairifeng region in 1999, I have spent more than 10 years researching the Chaoshan region. This research was published in 2012, Shen Yu Gui Jiqian, of which the Chinese translation was published in Taiwan last year. The study of Chaoshan led me to conduct further research on Chaozhou's funeral rituals and the Hungry Gods Festival in Hong Kong, as well as on Shantans in Southeast Asia. The third is the most recent study on spirit writing groups called Jintans, scripture halls along the Jianjiang River in Western Guangdong. My first visit to this region took place in 2016, but with the outbreak of the COVID-19, I was forced to suspend my research. Fortunately, I was able to take photos of many of the scriptures owned by the Jintans during my fieldwork, and for the past 3 years during the corona pandemic, I have devoted most of my time to reading these scriptures. All these studies involve community-based spirit writing groups. Although my research was originally based on an anthropological perspective, it now combines ethnography and literature, which has subsequently become my preferred research methodology. I would now like to briefly introduce my research background. As an undergraduate, I majored in anthropology and conducted my first fieldwork in Japan, and later for my graduate thesis, I researched female shamans in Okinawa. Also, I studied Chinese as a second foreign language at university. I did not major in Chinese study. It's only after studying my master's degree program that I decided to choose China as the main field of my study. As an undergraduate student, I didn't have many opportunities to study Chinese history or Chinese classics in a systematic way. So when I started my field research in China, I realized that my knowledge of Chinese religion was very, very limited. It's fair to say that I learned more from the local people, that is my informants, rather than from books. I have been interested in shamanism or the belief of the spirit medium since I was an undergraduate. As a foreign student learning Chinese in Nanjing University at the end of the 80s, I visited Nanton in North Jiangsu a few times, where I tried to interview some spirit mediums. Unfortunately, I was blocked by the Public Security Bureau and local government officials each time, and as a result, my interviews were not very successful. It was this bitter experience in Nanton that made me decide to make Hong Kong my research field after starting my doctorate. Hong Kong was a place where various religious activities were freely practiced. There were many religious associations, and I was able to research religion free from government interference. Hong Kong seems like heaven to me. Subsequent to studying in Hong Kong, I have been fortunate to expand my research into the areas of Guangdong, Taiwan, and Southeast Asia. Okay, so the research of the digital Daoist halls in Hong Kong became the starting point on my study on Chinese popular religion and speech writing. I described my field experiences at the Xinshantan in Hong Kong in my books. It was only by chance that I began to conduct my field work in this spirit writing group. Originally, I had intended to focus my research on spirit mediums like a donkey or a female shaman in spirit medium temples in Hong Kong. However, when I went to Hong Kong to conduct my preliminary research during December 1991, Professor Hiroshi Maruyama of Tsukuba University happened to show me a booklet published by the Xinshantan. He and his colleagues had visited this Daoist group in 1990 when the Taiping Chinja was held. To be honest, at that time, I had no information or connection whatsoever about where I could conduct my intensive fieldwork in Hong Kong, so I was quite willing to go anywhere anyone told me to. As a result, I wrote a letter to Xinshantan explaining that I wanted to visit the group. I soon received a positive reply and decided to spend some time there during my upcoming field trip to Hong Kong. At that time, I didn't know anything about speed writing, and I really didn't know much about the Daoist Patriarch Li either. When I first saw speed writing at the Xinshantan, I was not overly impressed, as I had seen Danqi in Taiwan. At first, I did not intend to make the Rizu Daoist halls in Hong Kong the main theme of my dissertation. But through attending the Xinshantan regularly, I became acquainted with the members and participated in various events. Soon, I became more interested in learning about these Daoists in Hong Kong, who were not professional Daoists, but rather ordinary people, such as office workers and merchants. As I continued my research on other Daoist halls similar to the Xinshantan, I came to realize that the Daoist halls in Hong Kong were almost a kind of religious movement, which arose during the 19th century and continued to develop over since. Finally, I decided to make it the main focus of my dissertations. But when I began to explore the historical development of the Rizu Daotan, I thought it would be enough to just refer to other scholars' research. However, I soon came to realize there was little research on Daoism in Hong Kong and Canton because most historians and sinologists were not interested in this topic at the time. Therefore, I was forced to search for historical materials on my own. Fortunately, in the early 1990s, when I started to conduct my field research in Hong Kong, a few local scholars began to take up some Daoist temples as their research subjects. One was Cao Peng Yan's study, Daoist ritual music of the Yuran Penghui in Hong Kong Daoist temple, published in 1989. In this book, Cao discusses the Daoist rituals and music of the Union Xuanyuan. Then, in 1991, Bartholomew Tsui's study, Taoist Tradition and Change, the story of the complete perfection sect in Hong Kong, was published. It was a pioneering study that comprehensively and historically discussed a number of Rizu Daotans, such as the Chinsongguang and the Baodaotan in Hong Kong. This was in stark contrast to previous studies, which was just presented small numbers of Daoist halls separately. However, there was a serious problem with Sui's interpretation in that he considers the Lizi Daotans in Hong Kong as the direct descendants of the Roman school of the Chenjian Daoism. Sui's theory can be summarized as follows. The Roman school of Chenjian Daoism had spread to Guangdong from northern China by the end of the 17th century, as is apparent in the fact that the Daoist temples on Mount Luofu all belong to the Roman school. Daoist priest training on Mount Luofu spread over Guangdong. Major temples among them were the Sangyuankong and Yinyuankong in Guangzhou. However, during this process of expansion, some changes had occurred in the original Chenjian tradition. For example, the decline of monasticism, the amalgamation of the Chenjian patriarchs, and popular religious deities, and an emphasis on rituals and the introduction of speech writing. This change had resulted from its responses to popular religious demands. To sum up, Sui's theory is based on a great tradition-centric viewpoint that the Lizi Daotan is a product of the popularization of the Chenjian tradition. However, the rise and development of Lizi Daotans cannot be explained only by this great tradition-centric viewpoint. The Lizi Daotan movement should be understood as a movement by lay believers rather than by the propagation of professional Daoist priests. In the Daotan movement, it was bureaucrats, local gentry, and wealthy merchants who became active participants that aggressively sought for Daoist knowledge and identity, and to advance their social prestige. Their political power, wealth, and strong devotion to Lizi and Daoism and speech writing became primary driving forces in the promotion of the movement. But in the early 1990s, when I started my field research, this perspective was not accepted by Hong Kongese scholars. A few years later, Professor Lai Chi-ting of Chinese University of Hong Kong published his articles on Daoism in Hong Kong and Guangdong, which gave my book a positive review. Also, Monica Esposito pointed out the history of the Chenjian Daoism was the process of integration of many other local traditions that played a fundamental role in its constitution. In other words, the Roman lineage was not originally a single linear tradition. Once it was established as a standardized school, many local Daoist groups hoped to access and link with it to legitimize themselves. Perhaps it is because I was not a researcher of Daoism that I was able to view the Daoist community in Hong Kong from this perspective. If I was a student of Daoist studies from the beginning, I probably would not have thought of the Daoist groups in Hong Kong as the theme of my dissertation, and I would not have questioned the Chenjian Daoism in Hong Kong and Guangdong. Okay, next, I'd like to introduce my second main research on Shantans in Chaoshan region. As you know, Shantan is a historical and general term indicative of charitable organization, literally meaning a whole of benevolence. While Shantans were established all over China during late imperial times, their organizational principles and activities differed greatly according to the social class and occupation of their members. The local religious and the local religious and folk culture, and the social and economic situation of the area in which they were based. One of the characteristics of Chaozhounis chantants is that they have placed greater emphasis on activities for the dead, including free coffins and burial services, as well as so-called syuku, literally meaning repair skeletons, collective burial activities for unclaimed bones and bodies. It also includes folk religious rituals held for funerals and memorial ritual services after one's death or during the Hungry Ghost Festival as a regular annual festival. More noteworthy is that Chaozhounis chantants are saint-based charitable temples organized around the worship of one or more saints or deities, as Chinese scholar Tan Chi-ben has pointed out. The members of chantants usually communicate with saints and deities through spirit writings. The most popular saint is Sontafon. This is the picture, the statue of Sontafon. Among the saints and deities worshipped by Chaozhounis chantants. Sontafon was a Chan Buddhist monk from Fujian during the Song Dynasty. He engaged in a project to build a bridge across the Lian River in Chaoyang County. His name and contribution were remembered in the local society for several hundred years. However, it was not until the Qing Dynasty that he became deified as a saint with spiritual power. He was especially worshipped by local people as a god who could control and repose the souls of unclaimed dead in syuku activities. It was after the end of the 19th century, he often descended in spirit writing seances held in local chantants. The thing I was most interested in was what innovations spirit writing had brought about to the chantant movement and Tafon cult in the Chaoshan region. The Tafon cult emerged around the middle of the 18th century in Chaoyang County and spread by various local associations, villages through a dividing incense system. In particular, a small charitable association called Chashe, meaning tea society, providing tea services and some accommodation for travelers, most of which enshrined Master Dagon's incense. In the beginning, the expansion of Dagon cult could not have been so rapid and wide. However, the movement of the Dagon cult around 1900 was described as a rapid and widespread expansion by some missionary reports. As this chart indicates, the number of newly founded chantants from 1890s to 1900s showed prominent growth. The reason why chantants expanded so rapidly and widely was undoubtedly the outbreak of plague and the spread of spirit writing. Once a god descends upon the spirit writing altar and tells people how to survive and cure the disease, the news would rapidly spread around the area. If the medicine and talismans that the god passed on were really efficacious, people would not only scramble to obtain them, but to ask for more help. As a result, some people who attended the seance or heard of its reputation began try spirit writing for themselves in their hometown, seeking the protection of Sontafon. Then, if Tafon really descended there, the location of this new altar would become a sacred site and attract devotees immediately. In this way, as more and more people attend the spirit writing seance, the number of spirit writing altars would also increase rapidly. There's one more possible reason why Shantung increased so remarkably. Since the middle of Qing, small mutual aid associations such as Yanmai Hui, an association for burial, or fumu-hui, meaning parent-village associations in villages, were also involved in the speech writing cult movement. In other words, the various existing voluntary associations began to install speech writing altars and statues of Sontafon. Speech writing played important roles in not only the rapid spread of Sontafon cult in a short period, but also in changing local volunteer associations in villages into religious cults acting in accordance with divine will. More importantly, the wide circulation of speech-written morality books and scriptures, especially eschatological scriptures, has changed the role and status of Sontafon. When Master Tafon started the descent to speech-writing altar, he most likely gave only medical prescriptions, talismans, simple response to an individual or family's wish. He was just a local deity, almost unknown outside Chaoyang area. However, with increasing influence from various spirit-written scriptures or some other sources like newspaper, his messages began to include discourse not only about a family or a village, but also about the outside world, such as the broader the world, the whole country, and even the world situation around China. Eventually, Sontafon became one of the savior deities sent by the Jade Emperor, such as Quan Di, Li Zi, and Wen Chan, to teach people how to save the world through speech-written messages. The eschatological idea of the speech-written scriptures, like this Xinbian Jiuzhe Baoshen, gave new meaning to the good deeds that people had been doing for a long time already. So, silk activities, traditional popular religious custom, were given a legitimate status in the salvific project undertaken by the celestial gods, and were recognized as the most important way not only to survive great catastrophes, but to save their own country. Okay, thirdly, I'd like to introduce my recent research on speech writing groups called Jintans along the Zhenji River in Western Guangdong. Although this research has been suspended due to the corona pandemic, I have written several papers with various topics. The original of which was a paper for the forthcoming book, this one, Communicating with the Gods, Speech Writing in Chinese History, edited by Elena and Matthias Schumann. Two main issues discussed in my paper. The first is how the 19th century speech writing movement was transmitted to Western Guangdong and took root among local people, focusing on the propagation route of eschatological scriptures and the believers involved in this movement. Then I discussed the rise and development of the speech writing movement at the end of the 19th century during the outbreak of plague in this region. In the second part, I discussed the localization of the new religious idea within the local religion by following the historical transformation of local speech writing groups since the early 20th century up until the present day. In this region, Jintans are organized by village people and usually located in the main communal temples in the villages. The members assemble in the temple and chant scriptures such as Minshongjing or Yuhuanzhengjing on the 1st and 15th lunar day of every month. They sometimes hold a speech writing seance on the birthday of gods or other festive occasions. Jintans are usually centered on rituals related to worshipping Quan Di. They also provide ritual services to their communities. This is the speech writing in the Shonshengon. That is also a Chintan. The 19th speech writing movement I discussed here arose after the Genzi year of the Daogan period, 1840, when a number of historic speech writing seances were conducted in the Ronyu Temple by the local Confucian elites of Pingyuan County, Sichuan. The speech written liberations in the Ronyu Temple indicated that a new salvation movement led by Wan Di and other saints, typically Wenchang leads Kuan Yin and other deities, was set to begin in 1840. This post-1840 speech written eschatological scriptures, which resulted from this movement and are known as Zhujiejin, usually included the following typical motif. The Jade Emperor was so angered to see people's more sinful deeds that he sent down great catastrophe, Jie, to exterminate immoral people. Kuan-Di and other saints were deeply saddened to see such misery, so they pleaded with the Jade Emperor for mercy and permission to awaken immoral people through their teachings, which were delivered via speech writing. The most typical combination of savior deities includes Kuan Di, Wenchang, and Li Zi, who are also known as the Three Saints. In 1891 to 92, when the outbreak of plague took place in Western Guangdong, the apocalyptic visions were reinforced in the local society. People held speech writing seances, praying for divine protection. These seances eventually produced new eschatological scriptures. For example, this one, the Wenwu Baosheng You Minjin, the main theme of which was the post-1840 Salvation movement by the Three Saints. Undoubtedly, the discourse and pantheon of the eschatological salvation had a great impact on the local religion in Western Guangdong. The speech writing halls in Western Guangdong were directly influenced by this movement. I discussed about the two case studies. One is the speech writing halls in the northern Gaozhou area centered on worshipping Guandi. The Jinshu Jingdan, one of such halls, has a variety of scriptures. Noteworthy among them are several ritual manuals, which seem to have been edited during the late Qing and Republican periods. All of the books are titled Confucian. However, the style and pantheon are similar to those of the Daoist liturgy. It is clear that some ritual specialists who had knowledge of Daoist liturgy were involved in the production of these manuals. My informant says that all of them were based on the divine messages that has been speech written there. The Jinshu Jingdan identifies itself as Confucian author Lutan. In the majority of the ritual documents, the member who sent it identifies himself as Xieden Chao Shou, Jinshu Jingdan Dizi, and addresses Zhongguan Dadi Guangsheng Dijun Dianhua, Dianxia. In addition, several descriptions often appear in the ritual documents, such as Zhongguan Dadi Zhonglu Zhaozhu or Zhanglu Shujian Jiaogong and Confucian ritual, Rutan. In one text, the Rujiao Yuebiao Ke also contains various ritual documents in which the three kings, that is three kings occupy an important role. A form of biaowen for praying for safety has the following phrase. 关兄弟兄，子东弟兄、护永弟兄殿下，祭出三界，建临十方，道救飞轮，何让苦海无极。Chinese scholars such as Wang Jianchuan, He Zhejian, Zhu Mingchuan have studied Confucian authors, Rutan, in southwestern China. I have compared my own ritual manuals with Rutan materials from other regions and have found that there is little in common except for the worship of Guandi. Instead, elements of local Taoist liturgy were more prominent. In my opinion, rather than particular Rutan texts having spread to different regions, the concept of Rutan with the Guandi as the main deity may have spread, and the ritual of each local area may have been recognized based on this concept. Okay, the second case study is a spirit writing halls in southern Gaozhou and Wuchang areas, which worship the female deity called Yihuan Gongzhu, the Jade Princess, as their main deity. I discussed the origin and development of the Jade Princess in my recent paper. The Jade Princess was originally a folk fairy called Gongzhu, court lady, who was linked to the tradition of the goddess Sugu. The Gongzhu appeared in the Shentai Chenjing, which was edited from the spirit-written teaching of Lady Shen, Gongzhu, and other folk fairies when they descended at the altar of Scripture Hall in Gaozhou in 1876. I tried to discuss the rise and development of the Jade Princess cult from the perspective of gender in my most recent paper. What is noteworthy is the fact that the Jade Princess was originally only an unnamed fairy, but in the late Qing, she descended at the spirit writing altar as a savior goddess sent by the Jade Emperor. She was ranked second to the Jade Emperor and later became one of the most popular deities in this region. Why and how did the Jade Princess rise to such high position in scripture halls dominated by Confucian male literati? And so far, only a few studies of local spirit writing groups have been made from a gender perspective. The perspectives that Elena has raised in her forthcoming paper have been very helpful to me. Elena focused on the role of women in the spirit writing community and the role of goddesses as a communicator and a transmitter of text. She also focused on the gender-specific connections established between women and goddesses. During the Republican period, the Jade Princess cult was further developed by the local redemptive society. In a spirit-written scripture edited by a local redemptive society in the 1920s, her status as a savior goddess was already established, and the long sacred name was given to her. Nevertheless, her image was still controlled by the Confucian view of the male leaders in the redemptive society and was described as a goddess of beauty and modesty, who was assigned the task of teaching women the three obedience and virtues. After 1949, the redemptive societies were forced to suspend their activities because they were considered huitao men, and the Jade Princess cult also disappeared ostensibly. It was not until the Reform era that the Jade Princess cult flourished again. One possible reason for this sustainability is that the Jade Princess cult is deeply rooted in female shamanism, which is widely practiced in local communities. The image of the Jade Princess who descends to the secular world to save human beings by order of her father, the Jade Emperor, was the result of a fusion of oral tradition rooted in folk shamanistic culture and written tradition of eschatological scriptures. In other words, the Jade Princess was a new deity created by the mediating role of speech writing between the written and oral tradition. Okay. So, to summarize my research to date, I would say that I have always be interested in local speech writing groups, especially concerned the mediating role played by speech writing between Daoist and folk beliefs, written tradition and oral tradition, elite and popular, and man and women. Finally, I'd like to talk briefly about my future research. I would very much like to continue my research in mainland China, but foreigners are not yet allowed to enter freely. Perhaps I should just give up fieldwork and concentrate on literature research. During the period of the corona pandemic, I spent most of my time reading texts, which was quite productive time. But when I went to Hong Kong at the end of March for the first time in 3 years and participated in the speech writing seance at the Xinshantan, I changed my mind. In the speech written liberation of the day, Lizu gave me these words that Kung Hon, this is my Daoist name, had visited me from away for the first time in a long time. These words made me very, very happy, as it has been 8 years since my last visit. I was actually a little worried that my shifu might be angry with me. I was so happy that my name was called, and the other members also said that it was good to hear my name called. Of course, I do not believe that the liberation was really written by Lizu, but by the consciousness of the speech writing medium. But speech writing seances are often very improvisational events that can change depending on the look and feel of the members present and the events that happened that day. I realized once again how attractive and exciting it is to be a part of this time and space where deities descend and interact with people. So I'd like to continue my research in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Southeast Asia as much as possible, and also to continue in mainland China. Thank you for listening my presentation. Okay,
Thank you very much for a wonderful, wonderful presentation. I am going to invite Professor Mori now to converse with Professor Shiga.
Yes. Thank you, Elena. I express my deepest gratitude to you and Sakai-san and all for providing us such a great opportunity to introduce Shiga's, Professor Shiga's study and share her idea with international colleagues. And Thank you very much, Shiga-san. And let me, please allow me to call you Shiga-san as always here. Well, let me ask. Well, before I move on to my question, I would like to say something about how I came acquainted with Shiga-san's work. When I began to be interested in Fuji or spirit writing cult to Patriarch Liu or Liu Zhongpin, inspired by the work of Yoshioka Yoshitoyo, I knew nothing about the reality of the Fuji practice. After all, Professor Hiroshi Maruyama, who was in the graduate school of Tsukuba University at the time, learned of my interest in the Fuji practice of Patriarch Liu and told me that a scholar named Shiga Ichiko was energetically researching the Fuji practice in Hong Kong. Later in 1997, I attended an international conference in Hong Kong with Dr. Maruyama and other scholars. And Shiga-san was not able to come, but beforehand, Shiga-san, you had asked Dr. Yozu An, a specialist of Daoist religions in Hong Kong, to take us to various religious sites in Hong Kong. That was the opportunity for me to see the actual Fuji altar and practice for the Fuji altar and Fuji practice for the first time. And this experience greatly helped me in my study of the Fuji literature. Since then, Shiga-san has always been a guiding light in my study. Without your Shiga-san's perspective, I would not have been able to start my own study about spirit writing. Now I would like to move along to my question. And let me ask very simple and easy to answer question first. I understand that you were fascinated by Hong Kong's religion when you first visited the city in July of 1988, because you wrote it on your book, the afterwards of the postscript of your first book, and you chose Hong Kong as your field for the study of spirit writing. However, in order to conduct research in Hong Kong, it is necessary to speak Cantonese, and in fact, you speak Cantonese. How did you start learning Cantonese? Did you start it after you decided to begin your teaching, your research in Hong Kong? This is my first question.
Thank you. I learned a little in Japan, a little Cantonese in Japan. After going to Hong Kong, I attended Cantonese classes at the Language Center of the Chinese University for a year. Anthropological fieldwork requires conducting research in the local language. Learning Cantonese has many benefits for me. Not only did it help me with my research in Cantonese, but it also enabled me to enjoy Hong Kong films in Cantonese. Okay, next, please.
As mentioned, question number 2. As mentioned at the end of your talk, you were initiated into this discipleship of Patriarch Liu at the Spirit Writing Altar in Hong Kong. You introduced this episode in your very fascinating book, Spirit Writing in China, 中国のコックリさん, published in 2003. Again, could you briefly introduce how you became a disciple of Liu Zu? Did you experience any significant changes after becoming a disciple of Patriarch Liu?
I became a disciple of Liu Zu just before returning home at the end of my fieldwork, maybe in 1994. I was never specifically asked by the members to join the group. But since I didn't have any particular beliefs myself, I wanted to know what it meant to be a disciple of God. Additionally, maybe this was the main reason. I wanted to be a member of this community and establish a relationship where I could call Rizu as Shifu or Shijun, and other members as Shihen or Shije in a familiar way. Since becoming a disciple of Rizu, I have not changed in any particular way. If I may say so, in a crisis situation, Japanese people usually pray to Kami-sama, Hotoke-sama, gods and Buddhas, but I can also pray to Rizu. But as I am not a very sincere believer, I can't say that I know what it means to have faith even now. Okay, so please, next question, Mori-san.
Or next question might be a little bit long and complicated. Well, I myself have studied some documents and scriptures of spirit writing cult to Patriarch Liu, compiled by intellectuals of the Qin dynasty. It seems to me that some of them prefer to connect themselves to any famous tradition through the medium of Liu Zu, while others emphasize the importance of connection to Liu Zu himself rather than connection to any other specific greater or orthodox or at least famous tradition. Let me take some spirit writing groups as an example, which involves themselves to the compilation of different versions of the Secret of Golden Flower or Tai Jinhua Zongji. The early group publishing Tai Jinhua Zongji, which included Pan Yan as its member, insisted on connecting themselves to the tradition of the way of pure and bright, Qimintao, through Patriarch Liu. On the other hand, the group of Qian Yupu rather valued the authorship of Patriarch Liu himself and did not put much emphasis on the connection to other traditions. And there were those like Min Ide who connected himself through Patriarch Liu to the roots of the unique teaching called the teaching of curing the world by 3 knees, or Sani Ishi Zhi Jiao, and the roots of which are said to be the heavenly worthy of primordial beginnings, or Yuan Shi Tianzun, and also the sages of the 3 teachings. At the same time, Min Ide also emphasized very much the relationship with the Dragon Gate lineage of the Complete Perfection School, or Chuanzhen Jiao Longmen Pai. For Min Ide, although he was not always conscious of the spirit writing of Patriarch Liu as a tool for connecting to the Complete Perfection School, he was conscious of spirit writing as a tradition or tool, which, along with the Longmen lineage, reinforcing their connection to the Daoist tradition. And how about the spirit writing altar you have researched? The shamanistic forces of the spirit writing altar in your field has such function of creating their own legitimacy through connecting themselves to other tradition or lineage, whether it is imaginary tradition or existing tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my 3rd question.
Oh, okay, thank you. The reason why speech-written liberations are considered to have legitimacy is that they are believed to have been written by the deities they follow. Even if the content of the liberation was a patchwork of the speech medium and followers' local knowledge, it was legitimatized because it was written by the deities. Of course, as Mori-san mentioned, some Daoist hosts try to further link themselves with other famous traditions, such as the Roman school of the Transcendent Daoism. I will take one person, He Ji-jong, or Ho Kai-jong in Cantonese, who was the founder of Jibao-tai, the predecessor of the Chinsongguan in Hong Kong, for example. He not only had a great talent for speech writing, also had a strong interest in Daoist knowledge and ambition. He Ji-jong claimed that Jibao-tai was a successor to the Transcendent sect in two ways. First, he himself became the Transcendent Daoist disciple and received the ordination. Second, he created a new branch founded by fictional Daoists of the fourth generation of the Roman school through speech writing and linked the Jibao-tai with it. He has remarkable ambition and imagination. He created a new genealogy of the Transcendent Daoism and linked it with the Jibao-tai to reinforce its legitimacy as an authentic Daoist organization. In contrast, Chen Mingkui, Qin Meike, the author of the Chanjun Daojiao Yuanliu, he did not rely on speech writing. Instead, he tried to explore what he considered to be the authentic Daoist tradition by tracing the history and lineage of the Roman school of the Transcendent Daoism and the Daoists in Guangdong. As a result, he established strong identity as a Transcendent Daoist. Also, it's not surprising given his environment and religious culture to which he belonged. He was a Tongguan then, and he would have used speech writing to receive guidance from the patriarchs and the Daoists of the past. I couldn't find any evidence of his involvement in speech writing in his writings. How speech writing groups obtain legitimacy depends on their orientation. It's not necessary that intellectuals are more likely to seek genealogical or historical evidence, but there are also intellectuals who have complete faith in divine revelation. I think that it may depend on the individual's religious experience and personality. Yeah, okay, so please, Mori-san, the next question,
And
please.
I remember that in your first book, you mentioned that the leaders of Chinsongguan stopped referring to such a connection between the authorized or greater, the connection between them, Chinsongguan, and the greater tradition of Roman Empire or Transcendent Dao. Is it correct?
Now I don't know. I'm not sure. The Chinsongguan whether the Chinsongguan is claiming relationship with the Roman school. So I'm not sure now, but at that time, maybe 2003, there was no the Chinsongguan didn't mention this this point in the introduction of the Jinsongguang. Yeah.
Do you know why?
Why?
They stop mentioning.
I'm not sure.
You're not sure. Mm.
So not maybe it is not so important or
Mm-hmm.
the relationship with the Lonbenpa is the fictional. So maybe many people knew this fact, or maybe, but I don't know.
Thank you very much. So, the fourth question, because of connection to the written word, spirit writing may tend to be seen as a literati-oriented tradition. However, you see the spirit writing altar as a place where the culture of the literate and the culture of the oral traditions are connected and intertwined. Can you further explain or elaborate the depths of the connection between the oral tradition and the culture of spirit writing practice? Wouldn't such way of looking at spirit writing shed some new light on spirit writing practice or understanding of the history of spirit writing practice? This is my first question.
Also, spirit writing was sometimes held in private spaces, such as the family. Most were held in public spaces, such as temples, ancestral halls, and huiguan, guild halls. Spirit written liberation is usually read out to people present at the same time as it is written. It may be read out by the spirit writing himself or by a nearby member. Also, the spirit written text is proofread to a high standard of style during the editing process. It initially contains many colloquial elements. In the spirit written text left by the founder of Shinshantan, many Cantonese phonetic equivalent were used. For example, koi, haimhaya, for example. It is clear the Lizu who descended the author of the Shinshantan spoke in Cantonese. The spirit written liberation includes a wide range of knowledge from the writer's existing religious knowledge to newly acquired ideas, vocabulary, and passages of poetry, but they are not always organized in a systematic way. For example, even if the passage from a Daoist scripture is included, the text is often quite difficult to understand because the vocabulary is reversed or combined with passages from other scriptures. But in this way, spirit writers who have read the existing scriptures incorporated the vocabulary and concept into his new spirit written text, which were then edited, printed, and distributed as new scriptures. While the copying and spread of books was a typical process of disseminating scriptures and morality books, in the case of the spirit written text, it was read out as divine revelation, often in a more colloquial style, and penetrated a more diverse audience. This function of the spirit writing seems to be quite important in considering the process of dissemination of certain concepts and knowledge. One more important point to consider is a close relationship between scriptures of goddesses and oral folk literature. Especially in Western Guangdong, some of the scriptures spirit written by the Jade Princess have a similar style and content to Muiko and Shang, which are typically preferred by women and children. The Jade Princess image as a savior goddess was likely created by blending oral tradition such as Muiko with a written tradition of eschatological scriptures. Also, the Jade Princess and Sontarpon both were originally local folk deities. They were promoted to the savior deities after descending to the spirit writing altar and making revelations. Spirit writing has played a dynamic role to change the divine pantheon in local regions. This is my idea. This is my opinion. Okay, so Mori-san, could you continue your question?
Well, that's all for my questions. And thank you very much for your sharing your idea with us. So, Elena, could I return the microphone to you now?
Sure. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. Thank you for the wonderful questions and specific answers. And now we have just 15 minutes for general questions to Professor Shiga. So if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question about her, I see